and come in. Enter, rejoice and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice and come in. Have you joined us in a spirit of meditation and reflection or prayer as we deepen into our service and share our opening words for the morning? Sometimes it's hard to calm down and just sit where you are, so this is your opportunity to do that. So listen to this reading, which is entitled Come Into This Place by Reverend Margaret Weiss. Come into this place. Come into this place with your whole self, the parts that are raw and exposed, the part that is beaming with joy, the part that is seeking the truth, the new, the possibility. Come into this place. Open your heart, lay down your burden, lift up your hope for something new to happen. Come into this place with fellow travelers on the journey, some faces new and others familiar, and all welcoming you here, now, to this moment. Come, let us worship together. All right, well, it's my pleasure today to introduce our program. The only thing I don't like about it is Betty isn't here to do it in person. So, but I hope she's watching. I hope she gets to see herself, because that's always a treat. Betty Mills presented the program we're going to show this morning on October 20th, 2019. The Growing and Deepening Council thought it was so good that we wanted to share it with you again. Betty is not just a founding member of our Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. She is a treasure, but she was here as a founding member in 1952. What a vision. Over the next several decades, she served on both district and national Unitarian Universalist boards and gave more than 100 speeches and pulpit essays to Unitarians and Universalists in the United States and Canada. More than 100. Betty's been a lifelong advocate of the Bismarck Veteran Memorial Public Library and for literacy for all ages. She played a significant role in the 1961 campaign to build a new library in Bismarck, the library you know and love now, when it outgrew its original, and she served as well on the Library Foundation Board for many years. So in her quiet way, she started a church and she built a library. No big deal. Betty was a Tribune columnist for 25 years and was instrumental to bringing public television to Bismarck. So pretty much all the things that we love that form the foundation of our lives, Betty did it. She was also a charter member of the Bismarck chapter of the League of Women Voters. There you go, another one. She taught nonviolent communication methods to prisoners at the North Dakota State Penitentiary as well. She's an amazing woman. Also, she served on the Bismarck City Planning Commission, the North Dakota Educational Broadcasting Council, and North Dakota's Advisory Commission to the Committee to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. In all, an impressive record of public service for a girl who grew up on a sheep farm near Glen Ullin, North Dakota. And a tiny side note before we go, I was with a friend whose father was moving into Touchmark this last week, and we were talking about how all the people that live there and how he's so looking forward to the social. And I said, yes, my friend Betty Mills lived there. And he goes, Betty Mills? Well, she's really great. Wrong politics, but that's great. So anyway, it just made me laugh because I love how everyone knows Betty and all of the work she's done. In this that you'll hear in this talk that you'll hear, she refers to the Robert Frost poem, "The Road Not Taken," in her pulpit. So we're going to start off the program with a recorded reading of it by actor Tom Hiddleston. So we'll get started with that, and then we'll lead right into Betty's program from October 2019.
The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveller. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I took the less travelled by. And that has made all the difference.
The other day I was pursuing a book full of advice about how to keep your brain functioning. A timely read, I figured, for somebody with a brain as old as mine. And as I was nodding my head in agreement with great frequency until I turned to chapter 2, and the operating sentence proclaimed that the Bible was the greatest book ever written. That is not, of course, an original contention, and questioning such a statement should be approached very cautiously. Teetering at the edge of blasphemy, I personally think the Bible could use a little editing. Obviously, I'm a biblical amateur, although I have read the entire book several times, including one at the insistence of my great old Swedish uncle. I asked him, because he was known in the family as an expert on the Bible, I asked him if he really believed that anybody lived to be 900 years old. He backed me against the living room wall and screamed for what seemed to me an interminable amount of time, telling me that I would believe every word in the Bible is true or I would burn in everlasting hell. This was from a frail, old Swedish bachelor who often didn't talk loud enough so you knew what he really wanted was the salt and pepper. And when I was a student at Mary College, I took a course in the Old Testament. It was taught by an elderly Benedictine monk whose specialty was biblical archaeology. It was interesting, and while it failed to shake my soul, he did capture my interest on the opening day when his question was a very interesting English, because it was heavily tinted with the French. So that I had been in the class, I suppose, 2 months before I discovered agriculture was agriculture. And the nun who used to sit next to me said, I couldn't understand why, if we were studying the Old Testament, he kept referring to Luke. Well, he was saying Luke here, Luke there. Anyway, his opening sentence to this class was, did Abraham ever exist? So I figured I was going to like the class. So what shivers my religious timbers? Obviously, these sudden grand moments would simply to be human and share with others some evidence that there is hope for humanity after all qualifies. But so unexpectedly can a beautiful North Dakota sunset, a grandchild's smile, there's lots of things that shiver my timbers. Most often, though, I find it in words, spoken, encountered in print. And my most prolific source for such inspiration comes, of course, as you might guess, through the Unitarian Universalist Church in its many manifestations. And I'm grateful for those special religious experiences. They are a big plus, but it's not something I expect to wallop me on Sunday morning with any regularity. What I want and need for my religious experience on a regular and ordinary basis is guidance and inspiration, answers, questions, the ethics of living, and the freedom to pursue all of the above. In addition, I need a challenge to my role and obligations as a citizen of the world and as of my own community. And underlining and enhanced by all of that is sharing it with others. Or so it states on the back of our morning's program, that I am, quote, grateful for the religious pluralism which enriches and ennobles our faith, end quote. So that's why I'm here on Sunday morning whenever possible. I had, of course, first to deal with whatever was in my head and heart from my growing up years. As many of us have, I attended Sunday services Sunday school every Sunday morning, in my case in the Congregational Church. My father would drive us in, my mother would stay home and make Sunday dinner. I thought as a kid that it was a glorious arrangement. And he would drop us at church with a nickel tied up in the corner of my handkerchief. And then he went down and bought the Chicago Tribune and sat in the car and read it until we were through. And that was our Sunday mornings. And then as I grew up, when I was home from college in the summer, I sometimes played the piano or that ridiculous old pump organ for Sunday services for adults. It was home, a place of familiar music and friendly faces. It was no place for questions. Questions are something that I took to my father. who was a devout follower of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I have a very tattered, very small little pamphlet that I found in his stuff one day. He kept it in his pocket because I would see him take it out every so often if he was stuck somewhere and needed to pass time. It was Emerson's essay on self-reliance, which was my dad's favorite of all the essays. My dad was a Unitarian. He didn't know it at the time, and neither did I. I was 26 years old when this fellowship was established. And I discovered my religious home, a place for the questions and sometimes the answers, a place where I was free to disagree, but more often to be inspired. Sometimes it was something said in the pulpit. Often it was a suggestion, read this. So of course I did. I'm forever reading things that people say, read this. I'm going to get that history book and read this. But it was how I came upon Lord Isley's book, The Immense Journey, one of the sources of this morning's readings. Isley was a native of Lincoln, Nebraska, and I believe he eventually belonged to the Unitarian Church there. And it was Charlie Stevens, the minister of that church, who suggested I read Isley's book. Charlie has actually been here. He came here in one of our ministerial searches. He came as representing the denomination. And he also was known. He was on the national board for American Civil Liberties Union. He was in Grand Forks in February for a meeting, which he then proclaimed to be as close to the end of the earth as you could get. Isley was a Nobel Award-winning scientist, and he was a naturalist. And the paperback I read was published in 1956, and I probably read it in the late 60s. I rediscovered it in the year 2019 while looking for another quotation by him, and I was fascinated all over again, especially by my underlined passages, which I almost never do to a book, even if it is my own. But this had quite a quantity. So I figured I was looking at the me of many, many years ago when I saw them. Isley is not only a notable scientist, he is a beautiful writer. As one commentator put it, the immense journey glows with the wisdom and the originality of a scientist who has pondered the riddle of existence and possesses the eloquence to put his thinking into words. So here's another illustration of that literary genius. Isley is contemplating the skulls of a vanished race of human beings commonly called boss cups. Found in an isolated area of Africa, it illustrates that the once existence of people with a human brain larger than possessed by any of us currently. The ratio of cranium to face in those people was 5-to-1. For Europeans now it is 3-to-1, which causes Isley to say, the need is really not for more brains. The need is for a gentler, a more tolerant people than those who won for us against the ice, the tiger, and the bear. The hand that hefted the axe out of some old blind allegiance to the past fondles of the machine gun as lovingly. It is a habit man will have to break to survive, but the roots go very deep. And this is him again. I once sat as a prisoner long ago and watched a peasant soldier just recently equipped with a submachine gun swing the gun slowly into line with my body. It was a beautiful weapon, and his finger toyed incessantly with the trigger. Suddenly to possess all that power and then be forbidden to use it must have been almost too much for the man to contain. I remember also a protesting female voice nearby, the eternal civilizing voice of women who know that men are fools and children and irresponsible. Sheepishly, the man slowly dropped the gun muzzle away from my chest. The black eyes over the barrel looked at me, a little wicked, a little desirous of better understanding. Tommyson, he repeated proudly, slapping the barrel. Tommyson. I nodded a little weakly, relaxing with a sigh. After all, we were men together and understood the great subject of destruction. And was I not a citizen of the country that had produced this wonderful mechanism? So I nodded again and said carefully after him, Thompson, bueno, si, muy bueno. We looked at each other then, smiling, a male smile that ran all the way back to the Ice Age. In academic halls, since considering the future of humanity, I have never been quite free of the memory of that soldier's smile. I weigh it mentally against the future whenever one of those delicate forgotten skulls is placed upon my desk. I think of Eiseley's observation when the great powers of our modern world hold conferences to discuss some reduction in the number of atomic bombs each of them shall retain. But the other rather startling discovery I made on rereading this book, The Immense Journey, was that I had all those many years ago accepted his premise that human life came to its present status on Earth through a long process, an immense journey from the original lowly cells to me and to you. Other fancier descriptions of how we get here are wonderfully imaginative, even poetic images. But the reality is, I think, less romantic. I long ago bowed out of the arguments about whether God created man in his own image. And this morning, I go once again to Eiseley. Quote, we are one of the many appearances of the thing called life. We are not its perfect image, for it has no image except life, and life is multitudinous and emergent in the stream of time. This is the stuff that shivers my religious timbers. For others, it's music, and still others, the satisfaction of social action that makes a difference in our communal life. Another of the benefits of belonging to this fellowship was in the religious education of our children, and the determination then and now provides an inspiring variety of programs. It is a really important aspect of our religious life. I believe it is important for children to have a religious home, perhaps especially in a community such as this one. They need a sense of their own belonging and a reliable source of support to give them comfort when they are plagued by a world that sometimes accosts them. When one of our daughters applied, I don't know how old she was, 14, 15, to join Rainbow Girls, one of the supervising adults objected to her membership on the grounds that she was a Unitarian and Unitarians don't believe in God. Quote, they don't believe in God, end quote. Well, I sent a message back in one of my unchristian moments, asking that if what God she was talking about, as described by St. Augustine as the God of all being, or by a later description by another, I think maybe Paul Tillich, God himself, or maybe the descriptions were the other way around. My daughter became a Rainbow Girl without further discussion. Admittedly, it was not one of my most stellar ecumenical performances, but it illustrated for me the necessity that we provide our own religious education for our children, that we equip them with the faith of this church or this denomination to deal with the world, which is surely going to accost them. So it is alternately amusing and exasperating to meet someone who implies I belong to some newfangled church, probably annexed to the Democratic Party or maybe to the ACLU. Then I get to tell them about Michael Servetus, who centuries ago, in addition to disputing the biblical foundation for the concept of the Trinity, he also wrote a very accurate piece about how the blood circulates in the body. Of course, that wasn't discovered for another 100 years or more, because Calvin burned him at the stake along with every book he could get his hands on. There are, in fact, only two of Servetus's books that are still in existence, and one of them is a heavily audited one that belonged to Calvin. Then I add, when I'm telling them about my church, the 5 presidents of the United States that have been Unitarian Universalists, starting with Thomas Jefferson. Well, that slows it down a little. Then there are lots of other variations you can use depending on who it is you're trying to convince. Now, almost 70 years after this church was established, I haven't changed my mind about where I belong or why I belong. While it is sometimes an interesting exercise to imagine your life if you'd made some other choice, I cannot picture my religious life on any other path than this one, the Unitarian Universalist one. It may be the one less traveled by, but for me it has made all the difference. And I see that we actually have time to have a discussion. Isn't that good?
I think it would be important for people here to know about the book that you shared with another author that's here in our library. And I think it would be good for you to, for people to borrow it, at least look at it.
Well, I really got into that because I taught in the church school, and I was teaching, for numbers of years I taught a course called The Church Across the Street. And it has a description of the major denominations, and we studied the Catholic Church, and then we went to Mass, and then on the next Sunday, and then following Sunday we came back and said, what did you learn and what are your questions? And we did that for the Presbyterians, the Lutherans. You know, it was an interesting exercise. But I started with, it book starts too. It's called The Church Across the Street. And I started with the Catholic Church, of which I had a multitude number of questions, many of which I got from the kids. And so I would go down the hill to my very Catholic neighbor. I loved her. She was a good friend of mine. She went to Mass every single morning of her life. And so I'd go down the hill and ask her questions. Well, one day she called me up and she said, you come down here and have coffee. So I went dutifully down to have coffee, and she said, Monsignor is giving a course on Catholicism for non-Catholics, people who are probably not interested in joining the church but want to know more about it. And I'm going to take you over and introduce you to Monsignor, and then you can take the class or not take it, but don't you ever come down the hill and ask me one more question about the Catholic Church. That was in February. And I have to admit, for the first time in my life, when I got to the cathedral and the class was downstairs, and I'm going downstairs and I'm thinking, this is spooky. It was just me. So I was in that class from February until September. But somewhere in the interim, in the course of trying to find out more about the church so I could properly teach that class to the junior high kids, I went to the library and I found a book called The Mouse Hunter, and it was written by a Catholic woman whose husband was an English professor at Notre Dame. And she had written 3 books by that time I found the book, but it was informative, it was also lighthearted and very funny. So I wrote her a fan letter, and I got a letter back. So a while later, a question came up, and I wrote her another letter. Well, this went on for maybe 3 years, 4 years. So then I wrote her and told her what I was doing now. I was in this class, I was really going to learn about it, and I wouldn't have to ask her any more questions. And I got a letter back from her saying, maybe we have a book. If you can describe what you're learning and not freeze up, maybe we have a book. So I thought, I never believed there'd be a book. So I just, I'd come home on Tuesday night and stay downstairs till about 2 in the morning, till my neighbor said, Betty, aren't you feeling well? You just look so tired some days. Well, you stay up till 2 and get up at 6:30 and you're going to look tired. But it was published, to my great astonishment. It was called Mind If I Differ. And it sold a fair number of copies. It hardly became a bestseller, but it changed my life. I became the most popular speaker in Bismarck for a lot of clubs, the Lullaby Club, that year afterwards. It was fun. I met lots of people in Bismarck I wouldn't have met otherwise. And I got wonderful fan letters. Some of them telling me they hoped I didn't mind being wrong because they thought I was probably a nice person underneath it all. And I went to my first district Unitarian meeting in Des Moines, Iowa, and I walked into this cocktail hour, and the first person I met said, "You're the one that wrote the book." And I was in. I couldn't have taken a puppy and done any better as a way of introduction. So it changed my life in many ways. I got on a train and went to Fargo and spoke to the Catholic. It's the Catholic youth group for the college. which was really interesting, I thought. And a good friend of mine who I'd gone to college with many years ago came to the meeting because I was going to stay at her house that night, and a woman said, "What do you Unitarians think of the soul?" And I'll try that. Somebody asked you to define the soul with the 150 people sitting out in front. And I said, I think if I tried to describe it, you'd probably think I was doing something in psychology. And she said, "I don't believe in psychology." Well, that just tickled my friend, no doubt. She said, "That's like saying you don't believe in gravity." You know? But it was a wonderful experience in my life, I have to admit. And there is a copy of the book. We've lost numerous copies over the years.
It seems to me that Unitarian Universalism really challenges the very concept of religion itself. I mean, in what way? I think the most outside of academia, the vast majority of people believe that religion necessarily requires the belief in the supernatural. I mean, in what way can a person be religious but be a physicalist, materialist, naturalist who does not believe in anything supernatural at all? And I mean, I think that for the vast majority of people is that's an oxymoron. It doesn't make any sense. Can you be religious and not believe in the supernatural?
That seems obvious to me that you can, because being religious is so much more than belief in a supernatural. I don't think that's a requirement at all. I think being religious has to do with how you treat other people and the world we live in, our responsibility to the world. I just don't. I mean, some people believe in some in the supernatural and some don't, and I don't think it defines religion necessarily.
Betty, has there been a time when you've questioned your Unitarian Universalism?
No, I don't think so.
That's cool.
I grew up surrounded by people. Well, in the little country grade school I went to, most of the other kids were Catholic, and they were the children of immigrants. And the Catholic Church was the one real basis of their life. After all, church was said in Latin, and so it was very important. And they told me with great regularity I was going to hell because I wasn't a Catholic. And, I solved that by going to my Unitarian father. And I asked him, "Do you believe in hell?" And he said, "No." He said, "But I try to live so in case there is one, I'm not in any trouble." And that survived me through whatever else. That was the perfect answer. I could use it for it was all right what I chose to do, as long as I didn't get in any trouble. And I just never have questioned it once I found it. It was with the first year or two that there were, 8, 10, maybe we got up to 15 members finally at first, until the first oil boom hit North Dakota. And then we were just flooded. That's when we built this building. Because we had geologists and what have you, and people who had belonged to the Unitarian Church in San Antonio. And it was a very exciting time. But at first it was just a small gang, and we'd find a new book, and boy, we'd bring it to church on Sunday morning. Everybody is so excited. Can I read this next? It was an interesting time.
As you prepare to leave this sacred space, pack away a piece of this church in your heart. Wrap it carefully like a precious gem. Carry it with you through the joys and sorrows of your days. Let its gentle glow strengthen you, warm you, remind you of all that is good and true, until you gather here again in this place of love.
Oh, below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean. Still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. Wide universe is the ocean I